Hey there, students. Welcome to the final installment of my lecture on the Wars of Louis XIV, and shout out to Mackenzo and Mr. Plug's AP Euro class. Thank you for all of your support on Periscope and everywhere else. Thank you so much. At Tom Richey on Periscope, by the way. And in this final installment of my lecture on the Wars of Louis XIV, I've already gone over the wars. Last segment focused on the War of the Spanish Succession. And then this one is going to focus on historiography. What did Louis's wars actually accomplish? And remember, historiography is about the interpretation of history and how history is written and what perspectives are employed. Not necessarily what happened, but how do we interpret it? What did Louis's wars accomplish? Now, when we look at the objectives of Louis's wars, we've got 1, to conquer new territory, 2, French dominance, 3, to weaken rivals, and 4, personal glory. And when we think about, did Louis actually achieve those goals? Well, he did conquer new territory. France was the dominant power after he finished. He weakened his rivals. The Habsburgs and the Dutch were never as powerful after Louis as they had been before Louis. And Louis certainly achieved a great deal of personal glory. Now, of course, this is one of the historiographical concerns because people may ask, was he trying too hard to achieve personal glory at the expense of France, or did his ego actually work to the advantage of France? Because when Louis says, "I am the state," it is not necessarily about that these are mutually exclusive. When I advance my interest, I also advance the state's interest. And I know it's up in the air whether Louis actually ever said, "I am the state," but it's attributed to Louis, and it's important because it goes into his way of thinking. Now, of course, another issue is the massive debt that came out of his wars. At what cost? When you think about what it cost France for Louis to fight these wars, did France really benefit proportionally to what Louis put in? And of course, you've got Voltaire, who said that, hey, Louis made France great, that Louis was always concerned with France. Now, there is a document here I'd like to look at. This is Louis XIV to Louis XV on his deathbed. Now, this is attributed to Louis. "My child, you are going to be a great king, but all your happiness will depend on your submitting yourself to God and upon the care that you take in bringing relief to your people. This means that you should avoid as far as possible making war. I have often gone to war too lightly and pursued it for vanity's sake. Do not imitate me, but be a prince of peace, and let your principal concern be to bring relief to your subjects." Now, on one hand, this seems to point to Louis as having a moment of clarity on his deathbed, as people often do. And Louis says, look, I devoted too much attention to war, and I'm sorry about that, and I really wish, as I think about the fate of my own soul, that I'd thought more about my subjects, and I thought more about being a good king to them rather than pursuing war for glory's sake. Now, on one hand, perhaps Louis is having this epiphany of sorts. Now, on the other hand, does this sound a lot like Louis? And where do we get this source? Can we really count on the veracity of this source? And when you think about it, who's to say that Louis even said this? And when we look at a document, we really need to look at all of the sides of that and always question, just because somebody says Louis said this on his deathbed, do we really have proof that Louis ever said this? Because it sounds very un-Louis. But it is valuable to us, even if Louis didn't say it, because it gives us a side of this argument that there are a lot of people who assess Louis's wars as vainglorious and not really to the advantage of France. And then, of course, you've got those that follow Voltaire's example, saying that, look, Louis's wars made France a great nation, and it increased France's position in Europe and altered the balance of power in France's favor. Now, as far as the aftermath of these wars, first of all, France was stronger. Now, France was stronger militarily and all of that kind of stuff, but there is also the counter-argument that France was in a lot of debt. And some people have gone so far as to make Louis at least partially responsible for the French Revolution, because Louis put France on this road to unsustainable debt. But France was unquestionably a stronger military power in Europe and the preeminent nation in Europe in the 18th century. The Habsburgs were weaker. That's something that is pretty much undeniable. No longer a Habsburg ruler of Spain. The Habsburgs do not have the same amount of influence in the Netherlands. Of course, there are other things that have nothing to do with Louis there, but the Habsburgs are weaker. The Dutch will never regain the stature that they had before the Wars of Louis XIV. The Dutch Golden Age has come to an end, although the Dutch Republic will continue to exist until Napoleon. Spain is aligned with France rather than with the Habsburgs, so that is an alteration in the balance of power. And then finally, Britain is the preeminent naval power of Europe. So that's another thing, that while Louis will be the preeminent land power, Britain certainly is a winner as well, because Britain is set up for the naval supremacy that will be the foundation for the British Empire, especially in the 19th century. So with that, that's an assessment of the Wars of Louis XIV, and a reminder that history is not just always about what happens, but it is about how we assess what happens. That's what we call historiography. So when you look at documents, always think about what is the assessment offered here, what is the interpretation, because at the end of the day, history is an art, a subjective exercise. And if you've learned something, don't forget to subscribe. TomRichey.net, social media, Twitter, Instagram, all of that good stuff. It's always a pleasure. They'd rather see me in a pen than me and Mackenzo rolling in a benzo.